We will now recommence the event.
Thank you everyone for returning, and I'm going to welcome Megan Spindler-Smith and Dr. Alistair McEwen AM to join us in our conversation. So Megan is our wonderful acting CEO at PWD, and Megan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And as said, I am the acting CEO of People with Disability Australia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm joining from beautiful Darug country in the Hawkesbury. As a visual description, I am a pale, femme-presenting person with red hair, dark rimmed glasses, and I am wearing a green top and green dangly earrings. And I have a very colourful background with lots of shapes and pictures. I am joined by Dr. Alistair McEwen AM, who is a former Disability Discrimination Commissioner and former Disability Royal Commission Commissioner and PWDA member. Before we begin, I do want to explain that this conversation with Alistair is focused on what we are doing and how we can really take stock of where we are 2 years on from the Disability Royal Commission. Looking at some of the progress from an honest perspective, from our perspective, of course, and thinking about the gaps in accountability. Alistair brings what I would see as not just a unique perspective, but comes as one of only 2 commissioners in the Disability Royal Commission who were people with disability, and has spent decades working on disability rights, discrimination, law, and systemic reform. And I know that from my perspective, I have been lucky enough to learn and grow through knowing and working with Alistair. In this conversation, we're going to focus on 3 things: what the Royal Commission was trying to achieve in those real terms, how governments have responded so far, and what still needs to change for there to be a delivery of meaningful reform for people like us, for people with disability. We're also going to be drawing on these themes and questions that PWDA's members have shared when they registered. So this is from you and what you're wanting to know. We won't be able to respond to every individual question live. However, your input is what has shaped this discussion. During this, there will be one short poll and one brief chat reflection prompt. There will be no live microphones for our audience in this session to help manage time and accessibility. So with that context, I want to welcome Dr. Alistair McEwen. Alistair, thank you so much for being with us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that incredibly warm and generous welcome. I'm coming to you from Ghana land in South Australia, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I also pay my respect to the many Aboriginal people who are part of this forum online today. I was born profoundly deaf. So I've had a lifelong disability. And I also want to describe my visual description is I'm a middle-aged white male with dark hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a blue shirt, and my background is blue. Megan, if I may, I also just want to pick up on the incredibly powerful and really strong statement that we've heard so far in this forum from Jeremy, your president, and welcome to the role, Jeremy. Daniel, my good friend Daniel McDonald, and also from Summer, who gave a very powerful testimony to the Royal Commission. Talia Rose for reminding us incredibly that First Nations issues are just as important today as they were, and to be reminded that 60 Aboriginal people have died since the Disability Royal Commission did an indictment of shame on Australia. And of course, Rosemary Hale, and absolutely I want to come in behind her when she said that it's a moral failure. And Megan, perhaps you and I will talk a bit more about that as we talk. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and of course it's wonderful to be here with all the members and other colleagues.
Thank you. And I think it's so important that we really start around discussing where we have and some of how things have been approached. So, from your perspective as a former commissioner for the Disability Royal Commission, what concerns you the most, or what is your perspective on how governments have really approached the implementation 2 years on?
Megan, there are so many concerns. I think the most alarming one is, if I want to pick up on what Rosemary was saying earlier, the response is a moral failure. And when I look at how they've responded and how they've implemented and how they're reporting, to me, it's still not clear that they are coming out strongly on the underlying drivers, which we expose to the most significant degree you can imagine in the Royal Commission through the testimony of thousands of people, private session submission. And at this point, I want to acknowledge the excellent submission from PWDA and the wider disability advocacy sector on ending segregation. And that was critical to the work that myself, Rhonda, Barbara, and other commissioners did. My main concern also rests on when I look at the implementation report and the response to the Royal Commission report, I just want to pick up on an example that when you look at and I'll just bring it up to my note. When you look at, for example, this is a very specific example, recommendation 7.43, and that was a roadmap recommended by Rhonda Galbally, Barbara Bennett, Andrea Mason, the First Nation Commissioner, and myself, as a roadmap to phase out group homes within 15 years. That recommendation is pretty clear, and we gave some suggested steps, and there was a wealth of evidence and information in the Royal Commission report to back that up. We didn't make this up. This wasn't anything new, and it's an issue that's been known for years. The government response, and 2 lines or 2 sentences, and they are: governments have not yet commenced working together on this recommendation. And the second sentence is, all governments remain committed to considering this recommendation further. Well, Megan, if I'm going to be frank, that could almost be characterized as disrespectful, insulting. Hello, we have not yet commenced. Well, not only have you had 2 years since the report, or more than 2 years now, this issue has been going on for decades. So I think, so when I reflect, I am very concerned that we're still not seeing an overall commitment from the government or the government to really say, okay, this is the problem, here's what we're going to do about it.
I think the thing that really makes me reflect in what you're saying here is the fact that when we are dealing with this sort of space and remembering why this happened in the first place, why we needed a Disability Royal Commission in the first place, it really leads into the fact that in my next question, really wanting to ask you about meaningful accountability, but recognizing that if we don't ground ourselves and remember as a community, as you know, as our government that represents us, in why this needed to happen in the first place, then accountability can become meaningless. So, what would meaningful accountability look like if governments really wanted to demonstrate their seriousness about delivering the Royal Commission vision?
These are very important topics, and we need to reflect quite rightly, Megan, on why do we have this Royal Commission in the first place? And if I can also, I guess I'm going to be frank all this time in the conversation with you, I was reminded in the early days of the Royal Commission when it was clear that there were going to be some challenges among commissioners as to where we might land with the final report and agreement and where our different understandings of human rights, disability rights, and the issues that disabled people were experiencing and continue to experience. So why? And I was reminded by someone who said to me, you have to remember that some of these people are why we have a Royal Commission in the first place. And I thought that was a very blunt but effective way of reminding me of the need to, and I think Megan, I think I was a bit naive maybe, but almost when I went into it with Wanda, and we had great hopes and we knew the weight of expectation on our shoulders for what we wanted to give back to the disability community. But yeah, the reality was they shipped, and at times we had a seventh commissioner for a while. There's the microcosm of what's going on. So in terms of now bringing that to your question and point about accountability, there's accountability and there's accountability. Now, I think it's right that the government is responding to the report in a transparent and very accessible way. There's EDV, there's Auslan, there's other ways you can access the report. Having said that, true accountability to me is we've got a problem here. And there are some suggestions in the report as to how we might fix those problems. And what's interesting, Megan, when the discussion was happening around the need or whether there would be a Royal Commission following the Bondi massacre and what a terrible thing to have happened, and absolutely there needs to be a spotlight on those issues. But Albanese at one point said, I don't think there's a need for a Royal Commission because there've been differences of views in prior Royal Commissions. And I thought, that's a very telling indictment almost of, well, we can't agree, we're not going to do anything about it. Is that what you're really saying? And I think a true accountability as a leader to say, as I just said, okay, problem here, we really do need to do something about it. And we know there are different views, but how can we facilitate? And I'm not suggesting a re-prosecution. God forbid, please, we are not going to have another Royal Commission. We don't need another Royal Commission for disability. But acknowledge that there are different views, but be firm on the human rights imperative and the case for change.
Megan speaking. I absolutely agree. And I think the thing that it makes me recognize and realize in this moment is as a community, if we look at disability communities, a microcosm, we are never going to fully agree on everything all the time. We can't. We are such a diverse community. And that is one of the things that makes us so brilliant. However, agreement doesn't mean you can't stay accountable and you can't move forward. You can't find ways forward. And I think that's a really good call out and a reminder. And to link in with that, we are going to put a poll out to all of you because we want to hear from you through the poll. And the poll should be appearing on your screen now. Yep, it's showing up for me. So hopefully it's showing up for you. What we really want you to let us know, and you can do this on the poll or in the chat if the poll's not working for you, is how would you describe the progress so far from your perspective around the DRC?
Sorry, Megan, I just missed that last sentence. Would you mind just repeating that? So
Yeah. from the DRC, how would you describe the progress so far?
Yeah. Yes, I think I was momentarily distracted by the wonderful poll that popped up, but thank you. This is really important. I think also, when you do have a wide range of views, you do have to be pragmatic, and you do have to allow all those different views to be expressed, no matter how you might be opposed to them or feel that yours is more worthy of consideration. I think human nature is that when you've had an opportunity, and pragmatic and proactive people will think, oh, okay, there is something there. I will sleep on it. I'm really good at sleeping on things. I don't like rushing into decisions or making, snap decisions on the spot. Megan, that's why it was so disappointing that we couldn't have a unanimous report. I would have hoped that 4.5 years was enough time for all commissioners to deeply reflect, utilizing their own deep knowledge and skills in various areas with a human right as the driving imperative. That said, obviously, some of us had to say, well, we can't agree to what you're thinking, and here's what we need to do. So I'm proud of the fact that we've got things in writing where we could draw on the experiences and the information and evidence and the submissions and so forth. Yes, so I think meaningful response, and this is not what we're really seeing, in my view, from the government, is a true recognition. Well, segregation. Segregation is still harmful. It is harmful. I don't need to tell you this. I don't need to repeat everything that was said in the Royal Commission, but I will say this. We know that for as long as you have segregated settings in place, the incentive and the motivation to reform or transform mainstream setting will move very slowly for as long as you have that default position. So meaningful response, I'd love to see more of a recognition of, here's the problem.
And I think, interestingly enough, we've got the poll responses here, and people are very much agreeing with you. They're talking about the fact that, we're really balancing very limited progress. For some people, for 38%, they're saying no meaningful progress, 10% some progress, and 1% strong progress. And I think that is also representative of what different people weight progress looking like. And I think that is representative of the systems that we're working with. So, Alistair, what kind of systems do you think would need to change first if we really want real reform rather than surface level style adjustments?
Well, I was just thinking, Megan, again, really important question and issue, because I would probably preface it by saying, before we change the system, we need to remember what are things at play that might stop us from doing a totally, committed, meaningful, almost singular purpose. So for as long as we've got group homes and special schools and sheltered workshops in play here in Australia, there will always be people, and government are part of the problem in that, well, actually, we'll tinker around here, but the transformational change, we don't need it because there's still places for disabled people to go, and we all know what negative outcomes come from that. System change also, I think, occurs when there's a recognition. For example, there's a Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the perfect example of a standalone document that articulates disability rights in the way they should be. I would have loved for that to have been a blank slate for Australia to start its journey for disability rights. Article 12 is a perfect example of it. That had been in place decades ago before we started talking about guardianship regimes and, substitute decision making. Hang on, Article 12 actually says start from the presumption that everybody can make their own decision. So you can see that system change comes from, in some ways, having to start from scratch in terms of disability rights. But I know pragmatically that won't happen for a long time in Australia. But the point I would like to make is, well, Queensland, with their announcement of 6 new special schools, is such a retrograde. It's almost a complete flip. It's almost be rude and absurd to the Disability Royal Commission report to the thousands of disabled children and adults who said special schools are not the place to be. So I think, yeah, from a systems reform, we've still got some way to go. I don't have all the answers about transformation, but it certainly also includes strong leadership from all stakeholders, including the disability community and government.
I think it's a really good point out that we've done all this amazing work. The community has laid themselves bare when it comes to the Royal Commission. And obviously, our system of government is set up in a way where we're balancing both federal, state, and territory requirements. Do you think that things like with what has happened in Queensland is potentially a barrier around responsibility for implementation across different departments or levels of government? And do you think that creates any risks for us as people with disability?
Absolutely. And I think in reflecting on that example of where Queensland have announced, I think $1 billion investment in special education, including the building of those special schools, and the siloing also of all the different disability issues that are at play across all parts of life. And we recommended a cross-government centralized way of overseeing implementation, overseeing disability rights movement, policies and procedures. And so when you see an example like Queensland, it also is a reminder that there are still some very strong voices and strong interest groups, if you can call them that, who want to see special schools, who want to see shelter workshops continue, who want to see group homes continue, because disabled people are safer in those settings when we know that's not the case at all. So one of the things I've learned is when you've got disabled people in leadership positions, and we don't see many of them at government level, at the highest level. We've got a few politicians, wonderful to see them, not enough, certainly not representative of the population. So when we see disabled people in the room, that does shift some movement. Whilst it might be glacial, again, and very slow, it at least means government cannot shy away from the issue. If a disabled leader, a CEO of, say, an organisation that provides services for disabled people, you can't shy away from that when you've got that strong leadership in place.
Megan speaking, I think it's so important because it's not just about representation. It's about the fact that when you are not just representing, but being a leader within your community, you can bring something to the table many of us can't if you haven't got that lived experience. And I think one of the things that we've seen around rights reform, around even just the right to a space in leadership, is around the importance of having things like a Human Rights Act. Now, many people don't know that Australia doesn't actually have a Human Rights Act. And it is one of those spaces where it gets confusing. And we definitely heard Rosemary talk about the strengthening of the Disability Discrimination Act. From your perspective, how important is us progressing on reforms like having a National Human Rights Act and the strengthening of the DDA linked in with what has been confirmed as part of the DRC recommendations to move us from active to away from the symbolic to active?
Another hectic topic, Megan, because it's so important that we get our legal and policy framework right, or as good as we can get it. And I completely support and want to see a Human Rights Act for everyone in Australia. And the Disability Royal Commission's approach was to recommend a Disability Rights Act in the context of saying we need the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, implemented into domestic laws and policy. How would that happen I don't have a view, and of course, the Human Rights Act would be the way to go. I just would want to make sure that we don't, in incorporating the language and the strengths of a DRA, Disability Rights Act, or the CRPD into a broader Human Rights Act, we just want to make sure we don't lose any of the important disability aspects. And that, I think, is a lesson that might have been learned from the states that had their own Human Rights Act, so Victoria and the ACT and now Queensland. Maybe we need to have a bit more of an examination of the lessons learned. Were their acts strong enough to protect disabled people? As you were talking, Megan, you also reminded me of the importance of representation and lived experience. And can I just touch upon the really important advocacy work that, you and so many others do, PWDA, the other DROs, the other DPOs, or the advocacy organisations. We're in a really interesting time at the moment because we've almost become fragmented, and that's been there's no one to blame in that sense. It's because of the sheer relentlessness of reforms that keep coming out from the government, many of which will be a bit misguided in terms of is this the right strategy. And so all our energies are going to maybe the NDIS, and our foundational support. In the many years that I've worked in advocacy, I've been surrounded by many inspiring people, such as yourself and others. Importantly, it's an opportunity to be draw on the individual, but then be collective, strong and united. And we don't need reminding that the campaign to establish the NDIS was a perfect example of saying, problem is states and territories and federal disability services are failing. We need a new, unified, person-centered, human rights-based. As we've now seen, that's evolved into things that have been very hard to control, particularly around bureaucracy and sheer inefficiency. Megan, that's a conversation for another time, but the point here is a lot of our attention has been focused on that. So I would love for going forward is to reflect on what were the commonalities where we all agreed, and then if I can reflect on the recent campaign to have a Royal Commission into anti-Semitism and social cohesion, it was relentless. Every day the message was the same. The media picked up on it. The Jewish community were very strong on it. Others then picked up on it. Well, we have an opportunity to do the same. And the fact that our rights as disabled people were not included in the hate laws reform, the anti-vilification, when we did recommend that specifically in the Royal Commission, that was a missed opportunity. I know crossbenchers and others tried their best, but again, Megan, it just demonstrates, does the federal government care about us? That's the big question.
And it's so important that we recognize that there are spaces where we are not being considered or included. And I think the hate crime space is a very classic example of that. And I know that recently Australia made 5 voluntary commitments as part of the 2026 Universal Periodic Review. And one of them was around the reviewing of the DDA in accordance with the recommendations of the DRC. And I think that is so important for us to be more vocal about and remind that this is not just a set of words that we're saying publicly in a universal global space. It's something that could make big differences for us as a community and would lead into strengthening and having a disability affirming Human Rights Act, which I think is so key. So,
Megan, so can I just jump in? And
please.
You've reminded me, yes, the DDA. Can we just talk a little bit about, my views on the DDA reform process? Really important. And, we shouldn't have to cherry pick, which ones we want. Everything's important. Well, there are a couple of recommendations, obviously, in that final report we won't go to because that's not the way we want to see things. But the DDA reform process, it's been good to see the commitment. I would still argue that some of it is a little bit like, that phrase, low-hanging fruit. We'll just pick something that's nice and easy. But that said, And if I was forced into saying just one part of that reform process, implementation of a positive duty to make sure you don't discriminate in the workplace. We've seen that with the Respect at Work for gender equality, and that's making organisations, oh, okay, we now have a legal responsibility. So, and that will pick up on what Rosemary was talking about. You know, the DDA reforms are important to change the language and and shifting the negative attitude around disabled people. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to indulge in just the DDA reform process. But last but not least, I'll pop open, I'll celebrate when the reforms actually go through Parliament successfully.
Look, I will be joining you there in the celebrations, probably wearing noise cancelling headphones while someone sets off crackers, but let's do it. So really, this is our last question, and I'm very sad because I love having these conversations with you, even in public spaces like this. But if we were sitting here having this conversation again in 2 years, what are some of those key changes you would expect to see in our lives as people with disability, if the government really wants to truly deliver on the intent of the Royal Commission?
Oh, Megan, you know, it is so important when I think about the example I raised earlier that we're all very aware with of Queensland investing $1 billion and building those special schools. If that happened in another 2 years in other states and territories, I do think we need to go back to what Rosemary was saying about the moral failure, and attitude and behaviour are just not changing. So it is my hope that in 2 years' time, there may be, and I'm not suggesting that there be a new campaign, a new sustained campaign, which is one or two headliner point from, you know, PWDA and others. But I think when I reflect on what happened with the Bondi massacre and the action following, the sustained effort and the building of allies and building of the messages, the 1 to 2 key messages that arose from it. So in 2 years' time, I want to see disability advocacy organisations stronger, more able to focus on the high-level strategic work that's so important, while also delivering to members that on everything that's important to them. And last but not least, the case for change in the Royal Commission is very clear. Mainstream settings are failing. So in 2 years' time, I would love to see disabled leaders across government, even if we don't have that cross-government one office that we recommended, and an office for disability, at least strong disabled leaders in senior positions across government, across bureaucracy, and across the sector as we have here.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that this is an example of how we as a community have to find ways to support each other, to find different types of energy to do this. Because I know for me, in 2 years, I want to be having very different conversations, and knowing that I can be like, we did that, and know that somebody else is able to feel safe to step up and speak up. Thank you so much, Alistair. I really do appreciate your time, your insights, and especially your leadership. It is so important to our community that you are still out there representing us and driving change.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. It's been a wonderful opportunity to have our conversation with you. I commend you and all at PWDA for your strong and sustained leadership. I want to remind myself that we had people, disability advocates before us, who made my path a little bit smoother, and I'm grateful for that. And I just hope that, you know, my aim is to make your path as smooth, but still know that there will be challenges to ride up to, and I'm there with you. I will stay online and watch I'll watch everything that happens in the forum after I turn my camera off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alistair. And definitely, I know that my pathway has definitely been a little bit smoother because of you. So thank you. I want to introduce one of my team members here at PWDA. So before we close this forum, we want to spend a tiny bit of time talking about what we're doing at PWDA, what our next space is, how we're actually going to push for real change. And this is really an opportunity for us to move from that reflection space and that thought-provoking space to what do we do now? Really, when we're thinking about it, is what is PWDA prioritising when it comes to the DRC? How are we engaging with governments and decision makers? How are your voices, the voices of our members and the disability community, going to be imperative to us doing that? Because in the long run, we cannot do this without your insights and knowledge and your voice and lived experience to actually help us know which way forward is viable. So joining me today is Michelle Keogh, who is currently the Acting Director of Systemic Advocacy at PWDA. They lead much of our policy and government engagement work. And really, as part of that, it is important to remind us what the DRC represented. So over 4 years, nearly 10,000 people shared their experience. People with disability, families, our supporters and our advocates told the Royal Commission about the violence, about the abuse and neglect and exploitation that was happening to us in our schools, in our disability services, in our hospitals, in our workplaces, in prisons, and in public spaces and places, and as part of our everyday life. It produced 3 full volumes of the lived experience evidence and made 222 recommendations. And it set out a clear vision of what a fully inclusive, disability affirming society would look like for our community, for people with disability, to know we are safe, respected, included, and supported for our full lives. So really, that's the benchmark we continue to measure our progress against. So Michelle, I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Megan. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michelle. I'm joining you from the lands of the Turrbal and Yugara people. As a visual description, I have long, straight, copper-coloured hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a plain black short-sleeved top, and I'm wearing headphones. Before we talk about priorities, it's important also to acknowledge what governments actually did in response to the Royal Commission. So across those 222 recommendations, governments broadly responded in 3 ways. Some recommendations were accepted, some were accepted in principle, and many were simply noted. What this means in practice is very important. When a recommendation is accepted, government is committing to implement it. When it's accepted in principle, it often means government agrees in theory, but without timelines, funding, or clear delivery plans. And when a recommendation is noted, there's no commitment to action at all. So while there's been a lot of language about commitment and reform, the reality is that much of what the Royal Commission called for has not yet been locked in through policy, law, or funding. And this is where advocacy becomes critical.
It is one of those things where we do need to understand, and Megan speaking, apologies, because there are 222 recommendations. They absolutely matter, but no organisation, including People with Disability Australia, has the capacity to drive them all at the same time. So we have to work really deliberately about where we focus our energy and our expertise and our influence. And that doesn't mean we stop or don't care about other areas or broader reform. It just means we're being strategic, because then we can focus on reducing harm and the risk of harm looking at how we actually make deep structural change and where our role as a national cross-disabled people's organisation adds the most value. One of the things that we do is work very closely with the other DROs, and we work very closely as well with organisations that understand the diverse and intersectional lens of disability, especially around how we work from a First Nations perspective, from a gender perspective, and even from, mental health challenges perspective. Our role is to complement the leadership of others while also advancing the core priorities that our members are setting for us and what we've heard from you over time and even now.
Michelle speaking. Before we go any further, we want to pause again briefly to hear from you. Another poll will appear on your screens and you can respond through the poll, through the poll or in the chat. And we invite you to answer the following question. What is one reform area you think governments must prioritise right now to progress the Royal Commission's vision of a fully inclusive society? There's no right or wrong answer. Share what feels most important to you. But your responses will help us to understand where our community wants to see progress speed up. The poll will remain open for the remainder of the forum. And then in our communications after the forum, we'll share a summary of the themes that have come through your responses.
Megan speaking. While you're taking a moment to think about these things, and it is important for us to hear this from you, we're going to talk a bit about where we're currently focusing and what we're prioritising at the moment based on what we've heard so far from our community. We have consulted extensively with our members in our community, and it has shaped our formal response originally and our follow-up responses, but also created an advocacy roadmap for us. And as part of that, we have some very clear priority reform positions that guide our work. But we know that we need to keep consulting, and that consultation is based on not just the Royal Commission's findings, but also on a few different spaces. These priorities really do reflect both the urgency and impact. Michelle, I'd love to hear from you around some of the key areas that we're starting to move into more deeply.
Thanks, Megan. Excuse me, Michelle speaking. Megan and Alistair had a conversation earlier about ending segregation, and that is ending segregation and restrictive practices remain a couple of the most urgent issues. And as Megan and Alistair chatted about, segregated education, employment and service models continue to expose people with disability to harm and exclusion. And restrictive practices continue to be used at absolutely unacceptable levels. So PWDA is advocating for, and some of the things that we are advocating for include national commitments to end segregation, stronger regulation of disability services, independent oversight, a commitment to elimination of restrictive practices, and real pathways to inclusive supports.
Megan speaking. I think it's also really clear that the Royal Commission noted how important Australia's legal framework is not set up to adequately protect people with disability. So what we are pushing for is strong reform on the Disability Discrimination Act and really making sure that what is talked about and what needs to happen is a positive duty space, a national human rights act that is disability affirming and enforceable rights protections that move beyond just complaints-based systems, because without legal reform, many other changes won't be sustainable or be able to be maintained long term. The other thing that we're talking about as well is around the importance of systemic failures across multiple systems. And so one of the things we need to make sure is that there are strong safeguards and oversights and accountability. That includes a national safeguarding framework that is very strong, clear accountability pathways when harm occurs, better data transparency, because if there's data, we can demonstrate what is happening, independent monitoring mechanisms, and leadership by people with disability in the oversight structures, so we know we are being effectively represented.
Michelle speaking. Thanks, Megan. One of the strongest messages from the Royal Commission was that people with disability must lead reform, again, as Megan and Alistair spoke about earlier. And this includes properly funded co-design, paid participation in consultation and co-design, decision-making power, and leadership roles in implementation structures and implementation processes. And PWDA continues across all of our advocacy to push for these commitments really to move beyond rhetoric and into practice in a really meaningful way. In terms of our practical advocacy, we are engaging regularly with federal, state, and territory governments. And this includes meetings with ministers, meetings with departments and ministers' advisors, submissions and policy briefings, and other types of written advocacy. Also participation in reform working groups and other working groups, and coordinated advocacy with other disability representative organizations and other advocacy partnerships. A key focus of our work right now is pushing governments to move from announcements to implementation. And that means clear timelines, transparent reporting, that there's proper funding when announcements are made, and accountability for delivery. And again, Megan and Alistair had a wonderful conversation earlier about what accountability means and what that looks like. Thank you.
Megan speaking. It's so important to recognise that, PWDA, we don't control government decisions, but we do have a responsibility to advocate for and with all of our community. We need to hold governments to account and keep our community informed. And we will continue to update members as the reform processes unfold. And we will continue to amplify our members and our community voices. We do want to hear from you, and we will be reaching out more often to get that understanding from you. But in the long run, we are going to continue to push for the full vision of the DRC to be realised. I'm going to hand over to Jeremy Hope, our president, to close the forum. Thank you so much for your time.
Jeremy speaking. Thank you, Megan. And I just want to say a huge thank you to our speakers. Quite an emotive but powerful conversation. Thank you to our community. Thank you to everyone who has given so much to the Disability Royal Commission. As Megan said, PWA doesn't control government decisions, but we do control how strongly we can advocate, how we can clearly centre the experience and the expertise of people with disability. The Royal Commission was not meant to be the end. It was meant to be the beginning. And PWDA will keep advocating for the progress for people with disability to be at the centre of and leading reform. Shay remains available for support for the next hour, and you can contact them on phone, which is 03 9118 9050, or via email. Hopefully those emails are at the chat, but if you need that, it's chevenson.psychotherapy@gmail.com. These details are in the chat. Also, PWDA contact details are in the chat. As I said before, pwd@pwd.org.au. We always want to hear from you. Please share your thoughts about today, but your thoughts in general. We want to listen. We want to learn from you, the experts in our community. Our phone number is 1800 422 015. I want to thank you for being part of PWA and for joining us today. Please take care, and the forum is now closed. Thanks, everyone.
PWDA Technical Support speaking. We will leave the forum space open for 3 more minutes in case anyone's responses to the poll are still to be received. We will give you a short prompt as we are closing that poll.